Welcome into episode 438 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, the Boston Bruins entered last night's NHL Draft Lottery with the fifth best odds of winning the draft lottery. And the Boston Bruins have won the number one. Nope, they're picking seventh, guys. They're picking seventh. They fell as far as they could have fallen. Bridget, Scott, how are you feeling this morning?
I'm fine. That doesn't affect me. My gut, not so good. I did have a gut feeling on Monday that
he is not
that the Bruins were gonna get the first overall pick, and instead they went the exact opposite direction. Ended up as far from one as they could have possibly gotten. So,
if you want to blame someone for a jinx, I would blame Scott.
I think I need to go to the doctor. Do like a gut health exam or something. Change my diet, something like that.
I don't know. He was really cocky about it, too. He even came in and looked at the combination sheet and was like, it's going to be that one. That is, and then it was not even close. I mean, to be honest with you, after they pulled the first ball for number one, we pretty much knew they weren't getting number one. Like, they had very few combinations that started with that number. I think they had one combination that started with that number. And we're like, oh, they're not getting one. But they were so close to getting number two. Like, they were just that last ball away from getting number two, which obviously number two and number seven are two big differences. And the reason it was less of a chance that they slid all the way to seven, because that would mean that two teams from behind them had to jump them, which is what happened. So,
and after those, so I know it's a little confusing to follow. Maybe people are listening didn't even watch, but so basically we got to see the entire process of drawing the ping pong balls this year, which is different than previous years. And so they draw the first ball, second ball, third ball, fourth ball. That makes up a combination that has already been assigned to a certain team. And yeah, as Bridget mentioned, for the second pick, the second draw, the Bruins had, the first three numbers were good for them. And then they had a chance, it was like, an 18% chance or something to get the second overall pick going into the final ball to be drawn. And there was actually only one combination left at that point that would have dropped them to seventh. And that's what it ended up being. It ended up being that ball for Utah to jump ahead of them.
Yep. So that was the most unfortunate bounce of the night for them, because with Utah and then the Islanders, who won first, they were 10th worst record. They're drafting first. And I know, Brian, you tweeted out what the playoff picture looked like at the trade deadline when the Bruins decided to be sellers, and the Islanders were behind the Bruins, right? So at that point in the season, they were very neck and neck close. But the Bruins sold off to try to get a better pick, and they didn't end up getting a better pick than the Islanders, unfortunately.
I would just say, obviously, and I posted that picture in jest because we now know what we know. And yeah, at the time of on trade deadline day, on points, the Bruins would have had the 10th best odds of winning the draft lottery, which obviously was the lucky number because that's where the Islanders finished. They were sandwiched between the Islanders and Utah, which is why I posted, because it was just funny, because those are the two teams who jumped up 10 spots. And I just want to say quickly, the Utah pick, what a buzzkill. The entire lead up to the draft lottery, you're like, okay, who's going to pick number one and who's going to pick number two? First, just the last thing you think of is that the second overall pick drawing is going to be so far-fetched that the team can't even pick second. They're going to pick fourth. But I just want to say
they both were so out there that, like,
right.
Everyone was leaving there going, this is stupid. This is this is why they haven't shown it on TV, blah, blah, blah. Like, it was certainly math didn't math that day. People with the highest percentages just were not getting it. And like San Jose ends up with number two by default.
Right.
Because Utah won the number two lottery, but couldn't move up that high. So,
and at least the Islanders moving up 10, at least they got that coveted pick, right? It's like Utah moves up 4 spots or 10 spots, and it's like, okay, so they get 4, and it's just an absolute buzzkill. But yeah, that picture that I posted on points percentage at the time, the Bruins were lower in the standings than the Islanders. The Islanders were actually on points percentage at trade deadline day. They were 10th, and that's where they finished. Obviously, and I post that because it's obviously the Bruins did what they should have done at the deadline. They sold, they moved on. They got some draft collateral and some prospects for some players that just weren't part of their long-term future. And it also allowed them to increase their draft odds. You can't be hypocritical and look at hindsight and be, oh, they shouldn't have. No. They did the right thing. They had far better odds than both Utah and the Islanders. And obviously, the odds were in the other guys' favor, but it wasn't because of, probabilities.
Well, the good news is
the odds weren't in their favor. They just got the lucky bounce of the ping pong ball.
Right. That's what I meant. Yeah.
The good thing about finishing fifth worst though was that, and if they had finished fourth worst, then the furthest back they could have gone was sixth, which the Flyers ended up doing that. But the good news was there was no situation where you're drafting past number 7, right? Like they fell to set, that's as far as they could go, right? Whereas if they had finished 10th and not gotten this incredibly fortuitous bounce that the Islanders did, we would be talking about completely different like players and range if they had finished as low as what the Islanders could have finished. So like if you look at the chart, they could have finished as low as 12 if they were in the Islanders spot. So, at least they knew that they were top 7, though I do think there's a difference between like, and I hate to say this, like the top 6 guys, I feel like I would have been comfortable with if they had anywhere in the top 6 and knowing that there had to at least be one center that they thought really highly of in that selection and that would be open in those picks. I'm not sure how I feel about 7. I feel like maybe those guys that you really feel comfortable with are off the board then. Like in our mock draft, we had the Bruins finishing exactly where they were supposed to be, which was 5th, just based off the take-a-thon randomized order that we got that day. And 5th would have been a really comfortable spot for them. And we talked about who would have been available then, but you have to think like Higgins is not going to be available for them at 7. Obviously, Misa and Schaefer are going 1 and 2. Is Frondell available? Probably not. Weei probably might not be available if people are going center heavy in the top of the draft, which is, it's a high possibility. So we're left talking about some of the guys that are a little bit more risky or maybe that don't have as high of a ceiling. And so we can go through those guys today if we want, or, I don't know if you guys would be interested in doing another mock draft closer to the draft, like to the actual draft, because now that we know the order, we can bring and like who's picking where for real, we can probably bring a little bit more research and do a little bit more in-depth dive into who we think might still be there. And also opinions are changing still about like who's going to be available, like who maybe has a step on other guys. And now that we know, who's picking in front of them, maybe we start to hear a little bit of rumblings of, oh, they really like this guy in, at this team or whatever. And maybe getting a little bit better ideas. So I'd be interested in doing that closer to draft day because I think we're still going to be hearing some news and people's minds might be changing about certain players.
Right, for sure. And like that comes, how much the drop of 2 spots hurts comes down to how much of a difference you think there is between the top 5 and 7. And that really depends on who you talk to. Like Bridget, you mentioned, the centers that we think are going to go in the top 5 or 6, Higgins, Weei, Frondell, but there's rankings that have those guys outside the top, like each one of them outside the top 5. There's rankings that have Jake O'Brien in the top 5. Central Scouting does. There's rankings that have Roger McQueen in the top 5. There's chatter coming out of the U18 World Championships that Brady Martin might be a surprise top 5 pick now. He had a great U18s. He plays a way that every team loves. He's extremely physical. He's the hardest hitter in this draft class. Works his ass off. And there seems to be this movement that all that might be more important than the fact that he might not have the offensive upside of some of these other guys. So there's still, like you said, like there's still so much that can change. So, in my mind right now, yeah, like I still have like a 3 through 6 tier with those 3 centers you mentioned, Hagens, Denwye, Frondell, and I would add Porter Martone, the winger. So in my mind, yeah, there is a little bit of a drop off after 6 to say the next group, which would include centers like Martin, Jake O'Brien, McQueen, and if you want to throw a winger, Victor Eklund in there. But it's not like there's a huge gap. I'd be lying if I sat here and said like, oh yeah, there's clearly a difference between those players. Like,
but you'd also
if you
be
told me
lying.
5 years from now that Jake O'Brien's better than James Hagens, like that wouldn't be shocking. Like there's not that big of a difference. So if you're of the opinion that this whole kind of top 8, 9, 10 is, after the top 2, I mean, like if you think 3 through 10 is pretty jumbled together, then maybe that drop doesn't really hurt you that much because there's still going to be someone on there's still going to be a good player on the board, and B, there's going to be centers still on the board, which is obviously the Bruins' biggest position in need. So it just comes down to like what you see as their upside. Maybe it's someone whose upside is only second line instead of first line, but whoever goes third might end up being a second liner. Like it's not a great draft. There's not a ton of clear first line talent. So that opens it up to these kind of seemingly wild ranges of opinions where you're like, how can one person have someone third and someone else has them ninth? And it's like, well, because the reality is there's just not that big of a gap between all those players in that range.
Yeah, I would summarize it like this. I would just say that the combination of the subjectivity among prospects, certainly beyond, let's call it the first 3 or 4 picks. I think most people, fans, scouts, media members, would all, for the most part, would have Schaefer, Misa, Hagens, and Frondell in your top 4. Some have Martone, right? But like
the Frondell drop might be real. Like he was not good at U18s.
No, he wasn't.
And that's gonna hurt.
He wasn't. But let's just say that let's just list Schaefer, Misa, and Hagens as top 3. But even then, and this kind of illustrated my point. Like you just really don't know. But between the subjectivity of these prospect rankings, certainly beyond Misa and Schaefer, let's call it, and the idea that these mock drafts aren't going to be the real draft. Every single draft, some team takes somebody that's a reach, whether it's by 1 or 2 spots that messes everything up. So my point is there's a lot that is unsettled about this draft. There's not a clear ranking beyond 1 and 2. And I'm close to guaranteeing that whatever final mock drafts you see ahead of June 27th by professionals and whatnot, that it's probably not going to exactly look like that. So the Bruins aren't far enough down in the draft at 7 where they could not benefit from that. There's just too many unknowns. And but to your point, Scott, yeah, it doesn't appear that there's a ton of clear first line talent. But listen, as of right now, these kids are still 18 years old. There's still a lot of maturing and developing that they have to do. I see a lot of reports or criticism that on O'Brien's skating and Martone's skating, and maybe Denwye takes a little bit of time to get going, and Frondell takes some time to get going. And these are all valid, accurate assessments in this moment in time. But what do they look like at 20, 22, 25 when their bodies fill out and they have 3 or 4 years of pro experience and they're so what players are in their draft year is just not who they're going to be. We all know this, but I guess I'm just sending caution to the wind to fans who might be down in the dumps about, well, the Bruins are picking 7 and they're not going to get the guy that I want them to get. Yeah, if you want them to get Misa or Schaefer, yeah, you're not going to get them. You're probably not going to get Higgins. But beyond that, it really could be anybody's game.
I think the big difference for me in like thinking about this from Don Sweeney's perspective and like a manager's perspective, at 5, you would have had your pick of those questionable guys that some people see going earlier and some people see going later. Like, you at that point have the ability to put your scouting to work and use what you have gathered and you believe is the best option for your team. At 7, you might be stuck with what's left and maybe a guy that you wouldn't have preferred to have over, like maybe the guy that say not San Jose, say Nashville has a guy high that you're high on, and they take him right before your pick. And some of the other, like, say if you were ahead of them, like, and maybe Philly was ahead of them, they had a totally different guy that they liked. And it's hard because you just hope that teams like Utah, Nashville, and Philadelphia, the teams directly in front of you, have different opinions on the guy that you like, that you're hoping is still going to be around. Maybe they're low on Frondell. Maybe the Bruins are high on him. Maybe he falls there. Maybe, like, that's what you kind of have to hope more, rather than be able to say you have 5 guys in this range and you've scouted them out and you're really sure that these 2 or 3 are better than these 2 or 3. It just stinks that you might miss out on all of those guys that you think are potentially going to be in that range.
Right. Like, say the Bruins really love weei and the draft goes, Islanders take Schaefer, Sharks take Misa, Blackhawks take Martone, maybe Utah goes James Higgins. If you're 5th, boom, there you go. weei is right there. Maybe he was 3rd on your board and you get to take him. Well, by being 7th, now you put Nashville and Philly between you as well. And those are 2 teams that also need centers. Most likely weei is not there. Now you didn't get your choice. So, yeah, like, okay, you can still take Jake O'Brien might be there. But for all we know, like, maybe there was a clear gap on the Bruins board where they're like, yeah, we like O'Brien, but man, we love weei. Like, we just don't know. Now, that could also go in reverse. Maybe they just love Jake O'Brien. Like, these are all things we just don't know. I want to, Brian, I don't know if you had a point yet, but I was going to go to some mock drafts that came out.
Yeah.
After the lottery.
I was just going to say one thing, Scott. Maybe the Bruins not getting the guy they love is a good thing. Maybe it forced them into making the right
also
choice.
Possible. Yeah, maybe they're better off just being the team that has to take whoever's left. Like the Patriots with Drake May. Can't screw it up when you just have the obvious pick. But unfortunately, it's still not going to be obvious unless, like, Higgins falls to them or something, because there's still going to be a choice to make. But yeah, I just thought it was fascinating. So obviously, in the world of content, right after the lottery, everyone wants to get a mock draft out. So I pulled up 5 of them from, I think pretty respectable sources, just to highlight the fact that these 5 have the Bruins taking 5 different players. So The Athletic, Corey Pronman, has, again, most of the centers we mentioned going off the board. Bruins at 7 with, Higgins, Frondell, weei all off the board, taking Jake O'Brien. There you go. We mentioned that possibility. Craig Button at TSN actually has both weei and Frondell still on the board at 7. He has Jake O'Brien and Brady Martin both jumping up ahead of those guys, going in the top 6. And he has the Bruins taking weei at 7. Our friend Chris Peters at Flow Hockey, who we're going to have on later this week, has the Bruins at, so he also has the usual suspects off the board, and the Bruins with a choice of O'Brien, Martin, McQueen. He has them going Roger McQueen. Daily Face-Off. This is Stephen Ellis. Again, Frondell, Hagens, Denway off the board. Bruins at 7 go Brady Martin. So now we have all 3 different drafts with this pick between Martin, O'Brien, McQueen, and all 3 have the Bruins taking a different person there. Sportsnet, Sam Cosentino, one of the most well-known draft guys, has, I think, the most off-the-board pick. He actually has the Bruins going with defenseman Jackson Smith, which I don't see and would be quite surprised by. But again, just in the sake of like, everyone just seems to have a different opinion on this. That, is another idea, is taking, I guess, what in his mind would be the best defenseman left. Although I'm not sure I'm not really very high on Jackson Smith, so I personally would not love that, but there's another angle.
Yeah, it just illustrates the lack of consensus and to expect the unexpected.
Yeah, and I mean, when we talked, and we should mention this too, because like Sweeney spoke after, and though there wasn't a whole lot to come out of it, I think that maybe the one thing that people might want to know that he said was that basically they're not anchored to drafting in a certain position, and that it's going to be best player available. So that means, I mean, in all likelihood, at that 7th pick, it is still going to be a center that's the best player available, right? Like it seems like in most of those mock drafts that you just read, logically, there should still be a center that is the best player available in that spot. Or like maybe they're higher on Eklund, who's a winger. Well, then that's one of the very few chances maybe that they end up, or maybe somehow Porter Martone falls to them. Like in that case, I don't know if they have a choice, but to take, the best player available, that would be a winger if Martone does fall there. But it seems more than likely that there's going to be a center at that position anyway. It would be a stretch to take a defenseman there, because I don't think that there's another defenseman in the top 10 of most people's boards, right, Scott? Like, it feels like a defenseman would be a stretch, especially for a team that really desperately needs a center.
Yeah, there's a couple that are kind of like fringe top 10 or maybe right in that range, Smith being one of them. Although I don't think he helped himself at U18s. He didn't have a great tournament. Radim Murtka, another one who didn't have a great U18s, playing for the Czech Republic. Kayshawn Aitchison, another that might go like 9 to 12-ish. But yeah, I don't that is like important to know. Like, just because we're listing all these centers and we think the Bruins are going to take a center, and they probably will, they're not reaching for a center. Okay, like this isn't Johnny Beecher at the end of the first round where everyone kind of thinks like, oh, they just reached because they wanted a center. No, like legitimately, that's just how the top of this draft looks. Is there's a lot of centers. Doesn't mean there's a lot of great first line centers, but a lot of the top 10 prospects happen to be centers, which is good for the Bruins. So yeah, like there are a couple wingers. You mentioned Martone if he falls. I don't really see them taking Victor Eklund. It certainly wouldn't be a reach at all at 7, but he's smaller and he's a wing. I just imagine the Bruins would take a center over him.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did the opposite approach of Scott heading into the draft lottery, and that was that I did not get my hopes up that they were going to win the lottery. So I kind of went into this expecting them to be around 6 or 7. Now, when I saw their odds increase, their live odds increase for the number 2 overall pick, yeah, I got on the edge of my seat a little bit more, and then I got let back down again. But my point is, at the end of the day, at 7 overall, the Bruins are going to get a very, very good prospect into their system. Whether that player ends up being a first liner in the NHL or a really good second liner, that's a very positive development in the big picture. Did they get 1? No. Did they get 2? No. We all knew 3 and 4 were off the board anyway once the season ended. So though in my mind, it was always maybe they get 1 or 2, but in all likelihood, it's 5, 6, and 7, and most likely probably 6 and then maybe 7. And that's where he ended up. But I'm very curious to see how the Bruins climb in prospect pool rankings compared to the rest of the league over the next 6 to 12 months, because heading into the trade deadline this past season, they were probably 30th, 31st, or 32nd, depending on who you asked, in prospect pool rankings. Well, since the trade deadline, you've now got Will Zellers, who just won USHL Player of the Year. He's going off to his freshman year at North Dakota next season. Very curious to see how he does. If he lights up the NCAA after being the USHL Player of the Year, he's going to be a highly touted prospect, not just by Bruins fans and Bruins media. He'll start to raise a lot of eyebrows. You added Fraser Minton at the trade deadline. Looks to be well on his way to being a regular NHL player, potentially as soon as next year. Maybe he's a third-line NHL player, but still a good prospect. And then you add in who they take at 7 overall. I'm just to name those 3, and whoever else they draft this year, if they get some, find some diamonds in the roughs in later rounds. But just those 3 mainly, I'm curious how they can potentially propel the Bruins in the prospect pool rankings. Obviously, number 7 overall right now is a big question mark. We don't know who that player is.
Yeah, it should move them up a little bit, just because, you're adding, even if not like a true elite blue chip prospect, you're adding a pretty high end prospect with the 7th overall pick. And just adding one of those to your pool should move them up at least a few spots or a handful of spots. I imagine they're not going to be jumping up to like middle of the pack or anything in all those rankings, but
that's because they're going up against teams that have been restocking the fridge for years, like San Jose and Chicago, and they'd be pretty hard to catch them.
Those teams are at the very top, so you're definitely not catching them.
No.
Yeah, they would start to separate from the teams that have been contending with the Bruins for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. That you should start to see the Bruins get some
Tampa,
separation.
Florida, Toronto.
Exactly. So now, guys, I wanted to bring up something to you because there's a lot of uncertainty heading into this draft. We got the draft positions settled last night, but we've discussed the subjectivity among many of the prospects and where they'll end up going, and who should be ranked higher than who, and where they'll end up going. But I also have this feeling that not only were fans and media blown away by Utah jumping up from 14th to 4, I think Utah was blown away and probably caught off guard jumping up from 14th to 4. And I just want to mention this since we're talking about prospect rankings, prospect pool rankings. The Utah Hockey Club, depending on where you look, is they're definitely a top 10 prospect pool ranking in the league, but depending on where you look, it varies. Some people will have them at 6th, some will have them at 7th or maybe 9th, but
You think they'd trade down from 4?
Well, this is kind of Bridget. Come on, where's your bedside manner?
So impatient.
Yes, that's my question. Is not only because they have a top 10 prospect pool, but also because they are a bubble playoff team as it stands. I'm fascinated to see if maybe not just the Bruins, but if anybody else can entice Utah to trade their number 4 overall pick for more of a win now, NHL proven package that maybe entails somebody else's first round pick or whatever. But I'm fascinated to see if something like that happens, because again, as I said a few minutes ago, expect the unexpected. That's what I've learned.
Yeah, generally top 5 picks don't get traded. Maybe it's slightly more likely this year with so much murkiness, but I I would be surprised. I think generally you get a top 5 pick, you want to keep it and add a good player. I don't think Utah's quite in like true win now mode where, you know, if they were a team that thought they were like a couple pieces away from contending, then maybe you try to use this to go get one of those final pieces. But I would think they probably feel like they're a little further away than that, and so you want to just draft another good player. But yeah, you know, and I guess as it directly relates to the Bruins, I also don't think they have that player to trade if they were even looking at the possibility. You know, I don't think the Bruins are in a position to trade a young you know, like Mason Lohrei, right? Like I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe you consider if there's someone there at 4 that you love enough, but otherwise I don't really see it.
I mean, what if it was like what if Utah, and listen, I'm not suggesting that Utah should do this, right? I'm just saying I think they were probably caught off guard going from 14 to 4. I think they probably see 4 overall, especially in what everybody's deeming as maybe a hit or miss. Anything's nothing but a sure thing draft. That,
and sorry to cut you off, but as we learned in 2015, a month and a half is not enough time to get ready for a draft.
Yeah,
Cam Neely told us that.
All right,
exactly.
He's being facetious, just for the record. Because also Don Sweeney was assistant GM at the time. So
yeah, no, exactly.
But yeah, I don't know if there's a guy that you want to get rid of or you're willing to get rid of to move up just a few spots from 7 to 4.
Well, and
right?
So
like if they're like, we want Lohrei and your first, like I just don't see that being worth it.
For who? For Utah?
To move from 7 to 4.
Well, okay, but that's kind of where I'm getting at. Like, I'm not saying Utah would or should do this. I'm just saying that they're, you know, I don't think they were expecting to be here.
What I'm saying is I don't think the Bruins should do, like, say that they were looking to like move it for, they want an NHL guy. Like,
but you're thinking of Lohrei. I haven't mentioned Lohrai's name. I haven't mentioned his name. You know, I know the name I was going to bring up was maybe like if they're trying to maybe look at like a Middlestat in 7, or maybe a Zaka in 7, or maybe you sign Geeky and package him with 7. I'm not predicting who it is, but Utah could be in a position where they're saying this draft is not a sure thing. This player might be a couple of years away. Maybe it is worth just dropping down to 7 if we're getting insert player back here. And so I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not predicting it. All I'm saying is you just never know. So let's just see how things play out if the Bruins, because you mentioned it earlier, Bridget, but Sweeney was asked about the idea of potentially trying to move that pick. Now, he didn't seem too confident that somebody above the Bruins would want to trade that, to your guys' point.
Yeah.
But I do think it's something that will be explored and talked about among GMs, applicable GMs. That's all.
And of those guys that you mentioned, I think I would only be okay with if it was Middlestat. Like, of those guys that you just threw out there.
I'd love to trade Middlestat to move up to 4, but I don't think Utah would have any interest because, quite frankly, Casey Middlestat's value not especially high at the moment.
No, but that's somebody but he's an NHL ready guy. I mean, who knows? But yeah, Sweeney mentioned in his press conference that one of the big differences between getting one of those top 5 picks compared to 7 was that you're going to be answering more phone calls on draft day and before, of people who are wanting to negotiate with you to see if you'll move that pick for the right deal. And so, yeah, there'll probably be fewer phone calls at 7 and, you know, fewer options for them based on how the ping pong balls fell yesterday. It was kind of like a buzzkill mood. Scott, would you say, like, when we were there, it was like, ooh, everybody was super hopeful to start the night, and then all of a sudden they ended up with 7, and that's, you know, that was the worst that they could do. So certainly the vibes were low. Vibes were off.
Yeah, I think Sweeney did a good job selling that he was still excited, you know, as excited as Sweeney gets when he talks, saying that, you know, there's still going to be a good player on the board. He made a comment about like they're comfortable with how the top 7 picks look, which again is what you say almost no matter what. But I do also wonder if that's the truth, where like knowing that they could drop as low as 7, as they're putting together their board or whatever, they might have been looking at it already, going like, yeah, you know what? We like whoever is 7th on our board, like if that's what we end up with because the top 6 are gone, we still like that player. I wouldn't be at all surprised because as we laid out, like there's a lot of differing opinions, and there's a lot of players that aren't separated by all that much. So obviously he wouldn't tell us if it was like, yeah, we really had a clear top 5 and it sucks that we're outside of that now. So you don't know, but he tried to spin it as like we're still going to be happy with whoever we get at 7.
Well, I feel like just like gut feeling, like if they like, I think that they're, as a lot of prospect rankers are, like Caleb Desnoyers, if he were to fall to 7, which is definitely not out of the picture, like that's in the realm of possibility. It's actually in our mock draft. Brian had picked Desnoyers for Buffalo at 7.
Well, I think Brian took O'Brien at 6. I think.
Okay,
So
yeah,
then
you picked. So he went 7 in our little mock draft a few weeks ago. Like him and O'Brien are both probably right around there. So if he falls, like there's certain guys that I'm sure that they're just watching and as they fall, like just chomping at the bit to see somebody like that fall to them. And like you mentioned, Frondell also, because of the late like lackluster performances, may fall, maybe not as far as 7, but there's a chance because he was super quiet at Worlds. So there's so much movement that could still happen. And yeah, some teams maybe go a little bit off the board, and maybe someone's high on McQueen and you're not, but someone's high on McQueen because they think he's got all this upside. They're willing to take a risk on the injury history, and they take him at 6, and you now have Desnoyers and O'Brien to choose from at 7. So I can see that happening.
I will just say, like the one fly in the ointment as it relates to Desnoyers potentially falling is that he's the one guy in this whole group still playing and making a really good final impression on GMs and scouting staffs and front offices, because Moncton is going to the QMJHL finals. They swept their semifinal series. He's been awesome in the playoffs, leads the Q in postseason scoring. They'll be favored in that final series. If they win, they go to the Memorial Cup, which is, the top, basically it's a different format, but basically the Canadian Major Junior version of the Frozen Four. Like it's the big final, the final 4 teams. And so if he continues to impress in these big playoff games, my guess is he's going to lock himself into the top 5 and maybe even as high as 3rd, because this is why I asked Sweeney after the lottery, how much do you weigh like these final impressions, whether it's playoffs or U18s, and he gave the diplomatic answer of like, yeah, of course you want to see guys perform in these pressure situations, but also we've been scouting these guys for years, and you're not just going to look at the final couple weeks of the season, which is the right approach. Nonetheless, every year these final impressions make a difference for guys. Like it's why Frondell might slip. So if Desnoyers has a strong final impression, it's probably going to bump him up a spot or 2.
Yeah, he could even be the second center taken in the draft behind Issa.
Yeah.
So I know, Scott, you weren't all that disappointed that Frondell was having a bad tournament, because maybe that means.
No, I was. I was very disappointed.
Well, you were, but maybe you shouldn't have been.
Well, no, look, I'm Team Frondell. I had him 3rd on my big board, and I wanted to be like blown away by him at U18s and be like, see, like this is what I'm excited about. And instead, I'm like just waiting for him to do something. And
yeah, but
it wasn't a very good tournament for him. Like he got overshadowed by younger teammates and teammates who are projected to go later in this draft. So he was getting benched in like key late game situations that not great.
I was not impressed with him as well. And like I've watched all of his accumulated highlights. I've watched his shift by shift highlights. Like I've seen a lot of the play, as much of the player as I could, without being somebody that watches him all the time live or as a scout. And then I watched him in the U18s, and just far too often, especially against really everybody, but especially the big boys, the US in Canada, he just wasn't very visible. And this is kind of why. Am I upset that, or disappointed that the Bruins lost the luxury of picking 5th and having more of a choice of these players? Yeah, that sucks. But I guess all I'm trying to say is, a Roger McQueen or a Jake O'Brien or insert player here could end up being you could look back in 5 years, but that was the best player that came out of that draft. Isn't that crazy? Or maybe it is an Anton Frondell or Caleb Denwaier. I'm just saying of the non-Schaefer, Misa prospects. I'm just saying that we don't know, and so I'm just not gonna get too upset over a draft where there's not a ton of hype about any of these players. I'll be pleasantly surprised if any of them pan out, and I won't be disappointed if any of them don't, because there's not a ton of certainty with them. And so I'm not gonna get too upset over 5 and 7 when Frondell, who we're just talking about is third on Scott's big board, didn't look very good in his recent play, and is now, like, if the Bruins got the 5th overall pick and they drafted Anton Frondell, I'm sure a lot of Bruins fans would be pumped. I'd be pumped, but there would be that seed of doubt in our mind, like, well, is it the Anton Frondell of playing in the Tier 2 Swedish league, or is it the Anton Frondell of what we saw him in U18s in Fort Worth? So there's going to be skepticism, I think, whatever happens, and only time will tell.
Yeah, I personally was not as high on him as Scott had been. I know there was some knocks on his skating as well. Like, his skating ability needed improvement. His shot was what really draws people to him. He's got a great shot. But if he's not able to have a full rest of the game, like, I had heard people, like some scouts say, like, maybe he's a bit one-dimensional, right? So maybe he does fall into your range, and maybe you have at least a choice whether or not you like his game or you don't. If this last lackluster, sample of his work gets him bumped down.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because it's like the more impressive part of his resume is what he did playing against men in a professional league, and the disappointing part is what he did playing against his own age group, against 17 and 18-year-old. Like, so usually that goes the other way. Like, usually you might have a guy who lights it up against his own age group, but struggles if you put him against older, more mature players. And Frondell has kind of done the opposite, which I think creates, a little bit of a conundrum that teams are going to have to sort through in terms of, okay, like, what means what? Like, this is a guy who had better rate of production as an under 18 player in the Allsvenskan than David Pastrnak and William Nylander. Like, that's hard to ignore, but then it's also hard to ignore that, like, he looked inferior to 3, 4 fellow Swedish forwards in this tournament. Like, I don't really admire these front offices who are going to have to try to reconcile those two things. And my guess is he's still going to go before the Bruins pick, but and for them, it's not, they almost don't have to worry about it as much, because if he does drop to 7, I think he's a pretty easy pick at that point. Like, I would be a lot less concerned about any question marks because you're getting a potential top 3 or 4 talent at 7. The teams in like 3, 4, 5 are going to have to, really do their homework and try to figure out what they think of them.
Yeah, he was one of the pros to him was that his physical development was further along than the others because he's been playing against men. Like his strength was considered to be higher than a lot of the other young centers that are available in the draft that are, they just have been playing with younger guys. So yeah, that's fascinating. And we will, I'm sure, continue to hear guys are in more favor, like they're moving up in favor, and certain guys are moving back in the way that teams look at them. And like we mentioned, the unfortunate part is like maybe you just don't have a choice between Denway and Frondell. You end up with one of them. The other one's not even on the board. So you take. Do you think in a way it makes it easier because like there will be kind of an obvious guy left if say one guy falls? Like does that make Don Sweeney's job easier as long as that stipulation's in there? Like one guy might just make it so that they're like, oh, definitely him. Definitely taking this person here because we were high on this person and slipped through the cracks for other people.
Well, according to a lot of the names we've heard and read about and talked about, I've had this feeling I think I even said this on our mock draft episode where I just said, I have this feeling that it's going to come down to whoever picks 6th overall is going to have a choice between Denway and O'Brien, and then whoever is 7th is going to take whoever isn't selected at 6. And I feel that there's a solid probability of that playing out if the board doesn't get super wacky. And so I think if Philly has a choice between O'Brien and Denway, I think the Bruins take whoever Philly doesn't take. But that kind of gets you to, okay, but or do the Bruins take a Roger McQueen if he is still available? And I actually wanted to get to Roger McQueen real quick. So I wanted to ask Scott to elaborate just a little bit for listeners, because you're not high on the player. You've said that, and we've cited that he has back issues, which is not a promising development for a younger player when you're talking about a potential 15-year career ahead of him in the NHL. And that a lot of his production this past season came in bunches against some of the lesser competition in his league. Outside of those two, I guess, cons, can you elaborate a little bit further about what you may or may not like about his game?
Yeah, I also I'm not blown away when I watch him. And I also don't like some of the analytics on him. And specifically in terms of play driving and transition game, like he seems to be more of an off the puck player. He's not leading zone exits a ton. He's not carrying through the neutral zone a ton. He isn't really relied on for zone entries. And that just kind of worries me because it makes me think he's more of passenger's not the right word. It's more of a support player than someone who's going to drive a line or drive play. And again, like this, I think I referenced before, I think it was FC Hockey had some analytics on it that kind of backed that up. I also saw something on Monday. I wish I had the Twitter account, because if people follow J Fresh Hockey on Twitter, he came up with an interesting stat that he basically called stuff per 60. And it was for NHL guys, and it was meant to measure just how involved are you during the course of play. And it was like everything from puck touches, entries, shots, passes that lead to scoring chances, hits, blocks, like just noticeable stuff per 60. Doesn't necessarily tell you like how good a player is, but just interesting how involved they are. And then someone basically took the same data and did it for NHL draft prospects. And McQueen scored out a little better than I would have thought, but some of the stuff I mentioned like did show up there as well. And he also doesn't win as many battles as you would expect a 6'5" player to win. So, how much of that is because he had his back injury and maybe he didn't come back 100%? I don't know, but I just there's injury red flags, and then I also think there's red flags in terms of his play if this is the kind of player he is, and there isn't like, I don't know. I see people say like, if he's healthy, he has a chance to be the best player in the draft, and I just don't really see that when I watch him. But maybe he gets fully healthy this offseason, gets a completely clean bill of health, and looks like a totally different player. Like, I'm open to that as a possibility. It's just hard for me to bank a top 7 pick on that.
Yeah, I had seen the same thing, that without injury messing up his season and last season, that this could have been a guy we were talking about at number 1. And you said you also saw someone who didn't even have him in the first round. So it seems like this guy is one that really there's such little consensus on. We'll have to ask Chris on Friday.
Yeah,
what
so
he thinks.
I forget which of these mock drafts it was now because I had so many of them up, but someone had him going well outside the top 10, I think. You can keep going. I'll let you know if I find it.
Yeah, no. What I had seen was that, and it's funny because this was a knock on Higgins, was that, oh, he doesn't drive play, but it kind of felt like we would be talking this similar, maybe a similar thing with Roger McQueen, which then begs the question, why do some people think that he should have been the first overall guy? And then you hear lengthy injury history and you just go, whoa, I don't know if I want to get involved with that, which is unfortunate for him because that's not, it's out of his control, but he lost like half a year of development because he wasn't able to be on the ice. So go ahead.
So Daily Faceoff Stephen Ellis has McQueen going 15th in his mock draft that dropped Tuesday morning. And Sam Cosentino at Sportsnet doesn't have him as a lottery pick, has him outside the top 16.
Guys, there is something that is so unsettling about this draft. I've felt this way for months now, and I'll tell you why. You guys speak of certain people saying that if he's healthy, maybe McQueen ends up being the best player in the draft, which right away, even if that's 90% or 95% not true, the fact that there's a possibility of that kind of just says to me, well, then 1 and 2 can't be that universally like consensus, right? Add to that fact, James Higgins was the number 1 consensus pick as recent as early January. And the number 1 consensus pick right now, Matthew Schaefer, only played 22 games this year. And I'm not knocking what he did in those 22 games, but it's just to have and I said this last episode, to have a number 1 consensus pick only played 22 games in his draft year, when a guy like Michael Misa played 60 plus games and had almost 2 points per game, it's something just seems weird to me. And then it's like, and if Misa's so amazing, then why are people even saying that Higgins or McQueen or somebody else could potentially be number 1?
And by the way,
backwards.
And Misa didn't make the World Juniors team, the Canadian World Juniors team, and Higgins played really well in World Juniors. And like, there's so many weird dynamics where it's not just like this guy came out and he blew people away every single like level he played at over the last few years. Like, that's not here this draft.
Yeah,
no, it's a crapshoot.
I saw a comment from Scott Wheeler at The Athletic, another prospects analyst that like I really respect, and someone asked him something about the draft class overall, and he said that he feels worse about this draft class now than he did at the start of the season. And he said it's the first time he can remember feeling like that about a draft class. So yeah, like that, to Brian's point, it's like, yeah, nothing got settled. Very few of these guys made like a great closing argument for themselves. And it is, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of potential to miss, which is scary because look, like we throw out like these like 11, 12 names that could go in the top 10. Some of them are going to be really good. There's going to absolutely be hits even outside the top 2. That's the nature of drafting. Some of them are going to miss. Like some of them just are going to be maybe third liners at best, which is not what you're looking for in the top 10.
You're occasional guy that plays like 30 career NHL games, or yeah,
like there could be a straight up bust, just like a non-NHLer, and And that's what I get why that is like terrifying for Bruins fans, because how can you trust that the Bruins are going to be one of the teams that finds the guy that hits? Like, how do you not just have this sinking feeling that like they're going to be one of the teams that misses on in this top 10?
And yet, ironically, Scott, you talk about how scouts are very uneasy about and feeling worse about this draft class now than the beginning of the season. And that's probably because some of the players they expected to go higher didn't have a strong end to their season, whether it's playoffs or postseason tournaments in the summer, whatever. But ironically, it's some of the players that are available, we think might be available to the Bruins around 7, like Jake O'Brien, Caleb Denwyer potentially, who have finished strong. Like Jake O'Brien,
Brady Martin for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but like Jake O'Brien climbing to 4th in North American, rankings among skaters, as that's probably why, like him going that high is at the expense of somebody dropping, which might lead to uneasiness for some of these scouts that anticipated Denwyer being higher. So it's honestly kind of ironic that of the players that might be available to the Bruins, they're the few that actually kind of finish strong. So, like, again, ultimately, who the hell knows? We won't find out who they pick for him over a month, and we won't find out how these players pan out for years.
I did want to quit. I want to get to, before we wrap up, Sweeney's comments about the coaching surge. But just as we sit here May 6th, we realize that my gut maybe can't be trusted. But do you guys have any gut feelings about who the Bruins actually end up with?
Yeah,
come the end of June when they pick 7th overall.
Yes, I do, and I've bet on the Jake O'Brien train for a couple of months now because when I initially was on his train, it was because I thought he was going to fall to where the Bruins were at the time, which was around 10, 11. And I definitely see some of the flaws in his game that people mention. I think his skating with the puck on his stick is pretty damn strong. He's one of those players that when the puck's on his stick, he kind of gets to another level. When the puck's not on his stick, sometimes he tends to react and not act. But again, all these players have attributes that they have, and then there's some weaknesses that they have to work on. I feel like it's O'Brien, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Bruins are the team to make that reach on McQueen. But if I had to say a guess right now, I would say O'Brien, because I think he'll fall to him.
I, like Scott, and I don't know if I have a real good premonition. My psychic abilities are not the best normally.
I have a strong premonition. I just don't know how much I trust them anymore.
Yeah, true. Like that's probably the difference between you and I, is like I just know that that's not a real thing, so I'm just like, it's probably not right. Whereas you really believe in yourself and your abilities that maybe you have from a past life as a tarot card reader or something. But
you got to believe in yourself. You just keep swinging, Bridget. You don't retire because you strike out once.
I like my credibility the way that it is. So, but
what did that ever get anyone?
Scott could give a crap about his credibility. No, I'm just kidding. This is who I really, really, really hope is still there for them at 7, and I would love for Denwyer to be there. And if he is there, you got to take him, right? That's what I think. I think there's a, say a 50% chance, or maybe a little bit less, unfortunately, that he's still around at that time. And if he is, I'd be really happy with that being their pick at 7.
Yeah, I would say over the last week, and then especially after last night, I can't shake the feeling that it's going to be Brady Martin. Don Sweeney and Cam Neely were both at U18s. I think they had to have loved what they saw from him, as did a lot of front offices, which is why you got this buzz pretty much across the board from draft analysts and scouts that he's now a top 10 pick and might surprise people and go top 5. I just think he plays a style that the Bruins can fall in love with, which is, like I said, very physical, hard hitting, just never takes a shift off, battles all over, smart, 200-foot player. Yet I do worry that he might not have as much offensive upside as even a Jake O'Brien, honestly. Like, O'Brien had 98 points in the OHL this season. Martin had 76, I think. if I'm
Yeah.
remembering correctly.
But in less games, right? Didn't he play like 50-something games?
Yeah, slightly fewer games, 72 points in 57 games. So yeah, even like on a points per game place, it's clearly lower than O'Brien.
How tall is he, Scott? Do you know off the top of your head?
6 feet, 6 feet,
Yeah.
184.
See, that's the thing. He's a little bit on the smaller side compared to these other options. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised by anything. I truly wouldn't. Bridget, I think you're right. I think if Denwayé is there at 7, I think you take him. You don't think twice about it. I don't know if he'll be there at 7, but Scott,
No,
if I could see him going for Martin too.
Yeah, increasingly, I think people's opinion of him has gotten higher than probably 7. So we'll see. Also, I just want to throw this in there, just one last thought, because you were talking about how Higgins used to be the consensus number, like, and then dropped into maybe more of a 4 or 5 range. Well, the fact that the Islanders are going to be picking first, and Higgins is from Long Island, like, I wonder if maybe there's still a chance he goes first, just because, if they're like, we want a center, want a local guy, like, this was kind of a shock to them that they would even have the chance to be in the conversation for it, because they obviously probably thought they're picking around 10 rather than first. Maybe he still goes number 1. I mean, there's a chance of it. Or maybe he goes 3, 4, 5. So just something to keep an eye on. He is local to Long Island, and maybe they just want like a good player, but also a player that has ties and like the fan base can really get around.
And Scott, just before you go to the Sweeney comment, and one thing as well is Higgins probably puts up similar numbers to, O'Brien and Martone. Maybe probably not as much as Misa, because let's give Misa credit. He had an outstanding point production season. But Higgins, if he's in the OHL, is probably putting up similar numbers to, the other guys that we're talking about here. But college hockey it's a different game.
It is wild to me. Like I've had more than a couple people like tweet at me when I've tweeted stuff about Higgins, about saying like these other prospects put up better numbers in a better league, and I'm like, bro, like, I don't know what year you think it is, but the OHL and the Q are not better leagues than Hockey East. Like, it's really not even that close, which is why you're going to start to see top OHL players jump to NCAA in their draft year or the year after, because they're now allowed to, and because it's just a better league, straight up.
Yeah, I'm wondering, and I don't have, any information on if they're like who these players might be considering, but like a lot of the guys that we've talked about, there's a chance they play in college in the next year or the year after.
I mean, Penn State just got a commitment from Michael Misa's brother for next season.
Did I see somewhere that Gavin McKenna is looking at the NCAA as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well there's another example. He's the projected number 1 overall pick next year. By the way, just quickly on that point, one thing, can I just say this? How can any fan base, based off of last night, have any sort of confidence, no matter where you finish between 32 and 16, that you would win the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes, that tanking for McKenna would actually pan out? Because let me tell you something, the year before this, last year's draft lottery, it fell the way that the odds were predicting. This year, we saw what happened. So it is anything but a sure thing to tank for Gavin McKenna. You can try to get the best probabilities, but it's not a sure thing.
No, definitely not. Not after this year. You wouldn't feel too confident about it. But do you guys think, though, like, and this is just a comment on the lottery and system, the way that they do it in the first place, like, I don't think the way that it worked out this year helps the league, right? Like, the end result of this lottery and where teams are drafting doesn't make the league better. Like, that's not who needs that pick. And yeah, and it just, I know it's an anti-tanking thing, but maybe change it so that teams that far back
go back to rigging it. This is what I'm saying, Bridget.
No rigging it. No,
need to rig it
to the good markets, okay? But like maybe we don't go all the way back to like number 10 can still get number 1. Like maybe put it back to like 6 or like, you know what I mean? Condense it so that you're not seeing such a huge gap of a jump when certain teams definitely need that pick more than others. So, yeah, that's just a thought on this system. I don't think anyone's ever going to be happy with how they do it. Some people just want the direct reverse order, and some years that makes sense. Some years those teams really do need it. But
yeah, I don't like that. Like, I like having some sort of lottery because
yes, that's why I'm saying like make it so that there's just only the worst 5 or 6 teams have a chance at number 1 rather than like what we're talking about, like this full gamut of odds for getting the first pick. I know it makes it more exciting for some teams. Islanders fans are probably through the roof this morning. This is the best thing for them, but it just doesn't seem quite so fair. So that's just my thought on it.
I mean, I'm sorry, guys, but I'm looking at Tankathon right now, and I just can't help but laugh after, 2 months of people running simulations and looking at the odds. Nobody ever was looking at Utah's 3.2% chance of picking fourth and the Islanders 3.5, but specifically Utah. It's like of everything on that board, look at all the blanks around Utah. It was pretty much the only thing that could have happened to them was get that second pick. Or I'm
They
sorry.
had a 94% chance if you look. They had a 94.7% chance of picking 14th.
Yeah,
and then a 3% chance.
Utah's only possibilities coming out of last night was they were gonna either pick 13th, 14th, or 4th. That's it.
Yeah,
that's
they
it.
can even pick. Yeah, I think most likely 14th or 15th.
Unbelievable! What a joke! What a joke! I feel bad for Tankathon. I feel like everybody's gonna just like boycott Tankathon. It's not their fault.
No,
But
they're
people
just
next year people are gonna
algorithm in there.
Yeah, next year people are gonna be like, it's not even worth going to Tankathon because it doesn't matter.
But you see what I mean? Like, why? I'm for cutting this list down from like there's 16 teams on here that have a chance theoretically, like, or not, like to move up significantly. There's 11 teams that have a chance of picking first overall. Like, can we cut that down to like 5, 6, or 7 teams? Like,
honestly, I think it's fine. Like, as much as I like to mock it, I actually don't mind the system as it is. Like, I think being able to jump 10 spots makes sense to me. So
why 10 spots is a lot.
I don't know why. Like, it's such a small chance. Like, there was such a small chance of the Islanders doing what they did. It's the biggest jump to number 1.
No, Scott. No. Did you happen to see the letter that went to Gary Bettman on behalf of?
This is what I mentioned. Yeah, this is what I mentioned on Arcane show last night.
You want to fill the listeners in real quick before we log off? The latest conspiracy theory, despite the live lottery show.
Yeah. So So if you want to go down conspiracy road here, the conspiracy for these two teams winning the lottery is Islanders were scheduled to have the All-Star game next season. The NHL basically took it away, but now is going to give the Islanders some other kind of pre-Olympic event to be determined. What exactly that's going to look like. But yeah, New York's governor on Monday afternoon, sent a letter to the NHL, basically like, what the hell? Like, what are we getting? You're taking away the All-Star game. Like, we were planning on that. So you got to give us something to like make up for it economically. And then that night they win the lottery and get the first overall pick. And then the conspiracy for Utah jumping up is easy. It's the newest market. So of course the NHL wants them to succeed.
I'm sorry, but we all watched it with our own eyes that nobody like forced that ball up the pipe. That was a weird thing to say, but it's still like, you know what I mean? Like, that terminology aside, that's the best way I could think of saying it, though it was definitely not. We watched it with our eyes. Like,
love a good conspiracy theory though.
Yeah, sure, great. But like, maybe I understand people believing it if they just like totally didn't watch the show, but we watched, and I
Listen,
didn't see
I've
anything
seen.
funky going on with the ball. So
Listen, I've seen magic shows. You can
this
you
man
can do
believes in
something.
magic and psychic ability, and I didn't realize you were like that, Scott. You got any crystals back there?
I mean, Bridget, you know Doug Lane. How can you not believe in magic?
That'd be
He's pretty good. He's got some good card tricks.
Doug Lane is a red producer / engineer, whatever at WEI. Does a lot of Red Sox games.
That would be
and is also a magician.
That wouldn't be a great PR look for EY if they were tangled up in a draft lottery conspiracy. I don't think they would tarnish their image, but you never know. You never know, guys. We'll keep the conspiracy theories alive. Why not? All right. We
Scott
good now?
Chaos.
Well,
Yeah,
just
I don't know if we should let Scott talk
Oh
anymore.
yeah, sorry, Scott.
Obviously, we're not going to get
hijacked you.
We're not going to get too deep into the coaching stuff because we're already way past. But yeah, Sweeney was asked about some questions about the coaching search as well, and said that he's talked to some candidates. So far, it's just been by phone. He's started to narrow down the list, and the next step is going to be Zoom meetings with some of these candidates, and then in-person meetings as sort of the last step of the interview process. Sounds like they haven't gone super deep. Like he was asked, what are these coaches, what kind of feedback are they giving you about the roster or whatever? And he said, they haven't really gone that far. Basically, these coaches are probably now, or these candidates are now kind of probably putting together like their pitch to the Bruins. The Bruins are learning more about them. He also said that some of the candidates are still coaching. So he didn't say in what capacity. Obviously, that could be NHL assistant coaches. It could be AHL head coaches. It could be maybe even a couple junior head coaches that are still going in Canada. Probably less likely on that, but could definitely see the NHL assistants and AHL head coaches. And, I guess on the NHL assistant front, like, names I would look at would be Misha Donskov, Dallas assistant, Mitch Love, Washington Capitals assistant, maybe Mark Savard, Maple Leafs assistant, although I don't think he's going to be super. He threw his name out there the last time the Bruins job was open, and I don't think he was really viewed as a serious candidate, so I don't know if that's changed enough in just a couple years. But I guess you can't rule him out.
Yeah, Savvy's a unit now too. Big boy. I don't know if you guys saw him on the TV broadcast. He was right behind Craig Berube on the bench. I was like, oh, who's that?
Who knew Mark Savard was going to develop into a power forward?
Oh, yeah. All right, Bridget, any thoughts on the coaching?
What I was going to say, my computer was glitching real quick, but what I was going to say was Donskov was, correct me if I'm wrong, he was part of the Four Nations coaching staff, right? For Canada?
Yeah, for Canada. He was the only, I think the only assistant coach on either the Canada or the US staff.
So
David Quinn was on the USF too, so. Okay, but he was the only assistant on Canada's staff.
Yeah, and so he is, maybe someone Sweeney has had a chance to talk to already because Sweeney was a GM of Canada. So maybe there's a little bit of a connection there. Not too tuned in on what that relationship has been in the past, but there's, that's a name that I think the connections are there. And then Ryan Mougenel wouldn't have had a chance, who's the Providence head coach, wouldn't have had a chance to interview yet. So they're really just starting to now. He said Zoom interviews are first, just Zoom connections, virtual, and then totally different step would be bringing guys in person, doing stuff like that. They're still in the really early phases of this, and the only two names he mentioned are in the picture, that he was willing to mention, or the two guys that are already on the Bruins coaching staff, which is Jay Leach and Joe Sacco. Because the question was, are the guys on your current staff, will they be back or will they be, candidates? And he was like, yeah, Jay Leach is part of the head coaching search. Joe Sacco, we already knew, and that's been said multiple times. Though my gut feeling, if we're doing gut feelings, is that the head coach is not Joe Sacco, I think he could still be on the coaching staff. And I think it'd be a good idea to bring him back as an assistant, but I just don't really think that that's the direction they're going with head coach. I think they want to they want to shake it up, and they should.
Well, would Don Sweeney have said, like last night he said something along the lines of what we're looking for in a new, or he said the term a new head coach. It's like, would you consider Joe Sacco a new head coach? I mean, or are you being technical because he was an interim head coach? Like, I feel like that kind of tipped Sweeney's hand that Sacco's not not probably going to get the job.
I mean, yeah, I would be pretty surprised if it's Sacco, and I mean, I guess you leave it up. Hopefully, they leave it up to the new head coach to pick the staff, and I guess if that new head coach really likes Sacco, maybe he's back. I kind of think honestly the Bruins could benefit from just a completely new slate. I was like, it was notable that he mentioned Sacco and Leach by name, did not mention Chris Kelly, who I never really thought was a serious candidate, but I know some fans have thrown his name out there, which I get. People liked him as a player, and he has been on the staff for a few years, but doesn't seem like he's in the running unless that was just a mental lapse by Sweeney. He also didn't mention Mujanel by name, which I know technically he was specifically talking about Boston's staff, but like obviously he could mention Mujanel. He's in the organization. It's not like you're talking about someone who's under contract with another team. So I kind of wondered about him not being mentioned by name as well.
Ryan Mujanel, I know he's a fun name and a popular name locally to throw around, and I'm not even discrediting his merits, but I'm just going off of what Don Sweeney said, which is the ideal next head coach of the Boston Bruins has some form of NHL exposure, is what he said. I think when he says that, he means at minimum NHL assistant head coach, assistant coaching experience. Ryan Mujanel doesn't have any NHL exposure, so unless Don Sweeney changes his mind, but that would just go against what the candidates that he would be looking at. But you never know. I'm not saying Mujanel wouldn't be a good candidate. I'm just saying based off what Sweeney said. And
one last thing to tie up, because this is something we mentioned after the last press conference with Sweeney and Neely, was that we were maybe if we had extra time, we would have liked to know what Chara's role was going to be. We did get a little bit of an answer on that. Chara is still going to be with the team as an advisor, but it's a very loose role. He basically, and maybe I'll post this clip to Twitter today, but of him talking about Chara. Basically, he is free to do whatever he wants, talk to whoever he wants, do the whole advising thing. It's very like not defined. Like there's not a lot of parameters on it. He's kind of just uses his instinct. He is not around Boston currently, I believe is what Sweeney said. So it's really only like an in-season talking to the guys kind of role. And he didn't indicate that there would be a change next season for Chara to step into like a coaching position, or basically right now it's up to what Chara wants to do with that advisory role. And maybe that this is just a foot in the door and like starting to get a sense for maybe if he wants to continue down the path of maybe being in the organization in a bigger role in the future. But as of right now, it seems like it's just advising, literally just involved with talking to the current players that are on the team if they want to use them as a sounding board.
Yeah, I think that's the right read on it. Just one correction. I don't think he meant that Chara's not around Boston. I think he meant players aren't around anymore.
Yeah, I guess he's not around. Yeah, he's not around
the players, but Chara lives in Boston, so
that's what I thought. I was like,
I'm sure he's around.
Still here, but who knows? Maybe he takes a vacation back home, in the off season, goes to Slovakia, has fun over in Europe. I didn't know. I thought maybe he meant that.
Well, his kids are in school though, so that wouldn't be till after then, anyways.
True. I forget about kids, man. I don't got them. I forget that school's a thing. To me, it's like no, off season is off season. So that's it.
All right, guys. Well, let's just wrap it up now. We'll put a button on this, and this is going to be a very, very eventful off season. And I know I know that many of you out there are probably a little bit down in the dumps today, thinking that the Bruins had a chance to pick first, second, fifth, or even sixth, and ended up picking seventh. But all I'll say is this: we just touched on a head coaching search, so there's going to be a new sheriff in town. I know people don't trust Sweeney and Neely, but it is what it is. But you got a new head coach.
Do you think it's going to be Shane Knighty? Is that
what
you're getting at?
Sheriff Shane Knighty. Oh, yeah. I'm trying to remember the Jack Edwards line when Knighty was getting in a fight with was it Matty Niskanen's not going to be a pretty little boy anymore. what he said. But so there's a new coach that's going to be in town. Obviously, they're going to get a good prospect at 7 overall for the future. They've gotten some prospects and picks in the system since the trade deadline. We'll see what free agency brings. Ultimately, we all knew that they were playing on borrowed time as an organization post Bergeron and Krejci as your number 1 and number 2 center. So ultimately, this team is in a better place than just the purgatory they probably were in last season and the first half of this season. So I know it sucks and there's a lot of uncertainty. I have no idea what this team looks like come October, but it's better than being stuck in quicksand post Bergeron Krejci with no plan. At least there's going to start to be some movement forward. It might not be 1 overall or 2 overall. Maybe it's 7 overall, but it's better than, 30th overall. But not if Sweeney's making the pick. I know, I get it, but guys, just bear with me here. Come on.
By the way, we didn't even touch on it, but Toronto went up 1-0 on Florida, and Sam Bennett elbowed Anthony Stolarz in the head. And,
yeah,
it was a good game.
And apparently not going to get punished. No, it really wasn't that hard of a hit, and I think if you watch now like other videos, Stolarz was most likely already concussed at that point. He had taken a slap shot off the helmet earlier in the game. But yeah, if you're looking for playoff drama and, hating Florida and all that, like that Panthers Leafs series is already off to a hate-filled start. And, a little bit of a surprise result game 1.
Oh, well, it was in Toronto. Yeah, it was a good game. Definitely worth watching. But I was going to say to what Brian, what you said about we're having an eventful off season, like there's still so much to cover. I was at a birthday party this weekend and with like a bunch of friends from college, and they were like, one of them comes up to me, he goes, "Are the Bruins going to be better next year?" And I'm like, I don't even know who's on this team next year. Like, I think it's way too soon to say if they're going to be better next year. We don't even know. Like, we don't know who they're picking up in free agency, who the coach is. Like, we're not going to know the answer to that question until much later in the summer. So.
What I do know is if they're not better next season, we'll be talking about a new GM next year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, guys, listen, even with all the question marks that we currently have, literal question marks of roster personnel. What we do know is that if McAvoy and Lindholm come back, Hampus Lindholm come back and have a healthy season, they should be better right there. I mean, right there, you should be better. So as far as everything else, yeah, but those 2 guys coming back makes them better right there. How much better? Obviously, that remains to be seen with it, but the roster personnel obviously remains to be seen outside of that. But anyway, thank you all very much for listening. Pretty long episode, but we covered a lot, and there'll be a lot more to cover as the summer goes along. Despite the lack of sexiness of the Bruins winning 1 or 2 overall, there's still some, it's still promising. Okay, so Bridget's got any final thoughts? So we get to wrap up.
I think I already had like 5 final thoughts. So yeah,
yeah, I'm finally out of ideas.
Okay, all right. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you later this week. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.